Ok, donc moi je vais quand même lancer ma question à M. Dietrich, puisqu'il est en charge des labels. Ce que je venais de mentionner, c'est finalement, quand on parle d'une entreprise durable, est-ce qu'on parle du produit final qu'elle donne, ou est-ce qu'on parle qui s'inscrirait dans la définition de la durabilité, donc de prendre notamment les générations futures, comme on le disait au début, en considération, ou est-ce que c'est le processus de production qui doit être durable, même si au finish, le produit fini peut être parfaitement nocif pour les générations futures?
Je crois qu'il y a plusieurs choses en fait. Le produit en soi est une chose qui est excellente. On a ici des excellents exemples de produits qui favorisent la durabilité. Cela ne veut pas encore dire, vous l'avez dit auparavant, que l'entreprise elle-même est durable. C'est-à-dire qu'il faudrait tous ces produits sur le marché dans toutes les entreprises, si on veut, pour qu'on ait une somme de tous les effets possibles. Donc oui, les produits c'est très important et ça contribue évidemment à l'amélioration de la durabilité de notre économie. Ce qui est intéressant dans les labels, et certains labels en particulier, c'est justement d'observer tous les aspects de l'entreprise. L'innovation est d'ailleurs un aspect évidemment que les labels observent. Évidemment, c'en est qu'un. Maintenant, on a vu dans l'exemple des pneus qu'il y a aussi un aspect transport qui est impacté dans la production. Par contre, il pourrait y avoir par exemple plus de consommation d'eau. Donc, l'idée de l'analyse de la durabilité d'une entreprise, c'est de prendre justement tous les aspects, jusqu'à des aspects qui sont plus organisationnels. Alors, on a bien compris le côté économique, on commence à bien comprendre le côté environnemental, le côté social, on y est encore de loin pas à niveau en Suisse, et le côté organisationnel, là il y a beaucoup de choses à faire encore. Donc c'est vraiment la balance qui fait qu'une entreprise est durable, à notre avis. Mais bravo pour toutes ces initiatives, parce qu'elles contribuent évidemment à l'ensemble, donc c'est évidemment excellent.
My name is Natalia Masra, I'm a student of the Simmons School, and I have a question. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you all for these wonderful and inspiring presentations. I have a question for Madame Garrel-Boschman from Espresso. The Guardian has written a very interesting article about the sustainability initiatives of Espresso, and there appears a little bit of secrecy when it comes to the take-back system for your coffee house. So you do a phenomenal job on take-back side, but on the take-back, all of the products that you produce, it's not so clear what Nespresso are doing. The percentage of coffee cups that you collect, nobody really knows how much you collect. You're not very eager to reveal that information. So what are you doing with that sustainability?
So thank you for your question. It's true that the recycling aspect of the capsule is a key priority for Nespresso. We have 3 public commitments. One is on the coffee sourcing, the second is on the recycling and the collection capacity, and the third one is on the carbon reduction across the value chain. So on the recycling, what we have done so far is to put in place, first of all, a capacity to allow everybody to bring back the used capsule in order we can recycle. So that's the first initiative we did, and today we have 39 countries where we sell the coffee that has put in place this scheme to collect the used capsule. That's the first thing. It's a lot of energy, a big effort also to implement that, because most of the market, most of the countries we are selling are not like in Germany, where you have the European Green Dot system, which is a collective system where you can recycle whenever you want, including the aluminum Nespresso capsule. Okay? So, excepting in Germany, Finland, and Sweden, we had to put in place dedicated collection system by ourselves, more or less. So it was a first huge effort. Then we come to the question to recycle effectively the used capsule. So for that, we put in place partnership in all the countries we have to recycle. And in fact, we work with third-party companies that are doing their own business model by recycling Nespresso capsule. Okay? So we invest in the collection of these used capsules that we bring to these factories, third-party factories, and then they take this used capsule in aluminium and they manufacture it into secondary aluminium that they will sell then to the industry to make plane, a bicycle, whatever in aluminium. So this is what we do at the moment, and it's true that the recycling rate is not the same from one country to another one. It will depend also of the consumer that will bring back or not the capsule. So it's true that our responsibility is to put in place as much as convenient scheme near the home of the consumer. But if the consumer doesn't give back the capsule, then we have an issue. So we are working on that because we take the responsibility. But it's true that sustainability has to be done all together. That's our part. But a material that could preserve the quality of the coffee and the freshness of the coffee. And it is true that so far, today, this material doesn't exist. So that's an issue we have because our business model is really based on the quality of the coffee, and we need to preserve absolutely this quality until it is in the cup. And the only material that we could find today is the aluminium. But the good news of using the aluminium is that if you recycle it, you can revalorize both the coffee which is used in the capsule, that you can use for fertilizer, that you can use to heat, like in briquette, to heat the home. And you can reuse the aluminium, because the aluminium is infinitely recyclable. So for this reason, if we manage to really increase this recyclability, this recyclable rate, by engaging more people to play the game with us, I think we will be not bad so much in sustainability, let's say.
Good evening, Gerard Post from IUCN, Business Biodiversity Program. So thank you for the various presentations. Merci pour les présentations. Et je vais focaliser sur un mot dans le titre déclencheur. We're going to focus on one word on your title, which is the trigger. Who is the trigger? Is it the company or is it the consumer? And I'm interested in the answers of the various people there.
Probably both. It's always usually it's not black or white. It's in the middle. I think in the market we see movements coming both from the consumer side, and we see also initiatives that are triggered by industries. And we have a lot of cases in which the company takes initiative with their peers to develop new solutions, and we see also on the other side customers that want to have better. So I think the trigger is actually our open-mindedness to be willing to go a step further, to go through the trouble of thinking new solutions, and then to come up with a new solution.
In the tire recycling business is completely different. We have to reinvent, we have to implement the system. Nothing exists today. It's completely fragmented. In Switzerland, if you go to your garage and change your tires, they will ask you for 4 Swiss francs per tire. It's not a tax. It's not a recycling tax. They ask this just to cover the cost. So what we have done in TRS, we'll work with governments. We will implement complete strategy with a decree that the government will add a tax, $3, $2 per scrap tire. And we have to explain to the government how they can use our complete system. That this $2-3 will help us to collect, to cut, to transform, to set up the industry, have a local library, and to export the newly recognized rubber powder on the international market that we will give access for each country. So we are in a very, very difficult business because we have to educate first governments that doesn't know about this. We have to find local partners, industrial partners who can accept our technology, and we cannot go into the countries if we have not the support from the governments. So we have to make two things: is a bottom up from the market and a top down from the government side. And we have seen it here in Switzerland. It's very, very difficult. The only country which is really organized is in France through an association calling company association calling Aliapur. They collect about €1.20 from each import and manufactured tire in France. And the manufacturers like Michelin, Bridgestone, whatever, they were happy to pay this. So I mean, to implement this tax for importers or manufacturers, today they would prefer to pay this $1, $2, $3 per scrap tire, because they think that we put in our responsibility here. We pay a country or a company to organize the recycling system, as you do for the white goods, as you do for the TVs, etc. But our difficulty is to start and to take it from the beginning and to do it from the first chain. From the consumer is very well. We tested here in Switzerland. If the consumer would like to pay 1 or 2 or 3 more Swiss francs per scrap tire, if he was informed about if it's going back to the industry, he said no problem. He can say, I can pay 6, 7 Swiss francs, but I have to have the certification, and I have to be ensured that this is back to the industry and will go back as this circular economy. So it's very, very difficult. We are in completely different. Nobody knows about what happened with the scrap tire.
For us, the trigger for the innovation is very much linked actually to schemes and legislation. Because we came with some of the development, some of the innovations bringing quite very interesting energy savings, and just realized that if you count on the goodwill of the people to invest higher amount of money into more efficient products, you get a very slow-moving progress with your product. And as soon as you get the legislation in place that tends to indicate to the people that they should act in a better way with respect to the energy efficiency, then you see immediately the things moving in a very important manner. I would take as an example basically what we call thermostatization waves in Europe, Great Europe, that started basically just after the reunification of Germany in 1989, or after 1989, where the German government, reunified, decided to force by legislation the installation of thermostatic radiator valves. And then we have seen in a question of a few years, millions of valves sold in Germany. And one by one, the different countries of Europe made the same kind of step. And before that moment, sales were, I would say, confidential on this type of products. As soon as the legislation was passed, immediately the sales take a totally other dimension. The interest of the people is there because they see a benefit into doing that. It's not only something they are forced to, but they are building energy rating, for instance, in Europe, with the labeling of the buildings, ABC. If you rent or you sell your building, you have to come with a certificate. It gives value to your building, and you could rent to a higher amount your building if it is rated A compared to a C building. And therefore, we get a system which is based at the end on values, not only the values we would like to see with respect to the environment, but also the intrinsic money value of the different goods.
Thanks a lot for the very interesting presentations. My name is Massimiliano Cartura. I work for the International Committee of the Red Cross. I work in countries at war. And I have a question for Madame Guerra. So it's about the South Sudan context, and I was just wondering, it's indeed very interesting what you have been achieving in that specific context, and I just was wondering when it comes to working in such a volatile environment where people are at risk of displacement constantly, and where you have a high prevalence of malnutrition, and you have issues linked to mainly linked to food production. I was just wondering if all of this is taken into account when it comes to defining your strategy in terms of productivity and then social responsibility. Is this taken into account? Because last year and the year before there were not only rumors but statements about famine in South Sudan, and therefore I would like to understand how this conjugates with your approach. Thanks.
So we had the Red Cross in our office this afternoon to discuss all these points. So it's interesting that you have that today. It's true that South Sudan is very unstable at the moment. We are proposing to revive the coffee farming there with the South Sudan coffee farmers that have stopped or reduced their activity in the region of Ye. And in the region of Ye, at the moment, in the area we are working, there is no famine at the moment. It's true that they are very poor and that the immediate cash they can get from the coffee farming help immediately not only the coffee farmer but all the communities around. The first benefit they get is quite quick because the day we started, it took 9 months after we could already buy the first, I would say, wild harvest to them. So we didn't wait that they improved the productivity to buy. What we did is we bought immediately when we arrived in the country and the harvest was coming, we bought immediately the cherries as they were, okay? Of course, it was not the fantastic harvest. It was very few coffee, but at least they get cash immediately. And then based on that, we have improved and worked on the productivity in order that the next year, the harvest was immediately doubled. So with that, we are not facing the issue you were mentioning, but we are at risk because the violence can come back, we don't know when, like that. And when the violence comes back, we have to stop the activity. And if we stop the activity, then we don't take care of the coffee trees anymore. TechnoServe has to leave for several months, wait that the violence stops, and then come back. So it's true that we are at high risk, and we take it.